excited when I was invited to give this TEDx talk. And then I was told the topic, immigration. I've lived in South Africa for my whole life. What could I possibly have to say about immigration? And then I realized something. Many, if not the majority of people I interact with on a daily basis, see me as an immigrant, as someone who doesn't quite belong here. The word belong has at least two meanings. On the one hand, it can refer to something being a property. This pen belongs to me. I own it. On the other hand, it can refer to being a member of something. I'm a member of the human race. I have certain characteristics that allow me to claim membership. Both imply a secure relationship. Since I bought the pen, I'm pretty confident that no one can take it away from me without my consent. And since last time I checked, I had pretty much human characteristics, no one can say I'm not a member of the human race. So in what sense then do I belong here in South Africa? Samantha Weiss, a philosophy professor at Wits, writes that there is a sense that we, white South Africans, need to earn our place in a country and a continent that is simply not ours. What does she mean by this? In what sense should we understand ours? Given the history of whites in the country, one might be forgiven for thinking that white South Africans think South Africa belongs to them in the sense of ownership, that we own it, or at least a part of it. But that doesn't feel right. So what if we take it to be the second sense, that those who belong in South Africa share characteristics? Well, what are the characteristics that allow me to say I belong here? Not my race. In 2011, the census figures indicated that whites comprise 8.4% of the total population. Not my language. English is only the fourth most common first language in the country, with less than 10% of the population being mother tongue English speakers. I have a very clear memory of the first time I felt I really didn't belong. It was in 1992, when I went on a school outing to see the film Sarafina, which was set in Soweto in 1976. I was deeply affected by the film, and as many angsty teenagers do, I wrote a bunch of poems. One has stuck in my mind, such that 25 years later I can still remember it. I tried to wash away my guilt in the shower. I scrubbed and scoured my body, but the more I scrubbed, the whiter I became. I think it's interesting that guilt was my overriding emotion. Not shock, not pity, but guilt. Guilt can occur for a number of reasons. A person may feel she has transgressed her own moral code, or she may feel she has violated a universal moral code and bears some responsibility for that violation. The extent to which I could be said to bear responsibility for the events of 1976 seem minimal. Believe it or not, I wasn't born in 1976. Moreover, I'd been to a multiracial primary school, and my high school opened in 1991 to all races, so it was really only 1 year that I was in an all-white educational environment. And yet I felt so guilty. Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung coined the term German collective guilt in 1945 in an essay in which he argued that Germans felt a collective guilt for what had occurred in the Second World War. Jung said collective guilt was, for psychologists, a fact, and it will be one of the most important tasks of therapy to bring the Germans to recognize this guilt. Bernhard Schlink, the author of The Reader, a best-selling post-Nazi era novel that has been turned into a film starring Kate Winslet, speaks about the extent of collective guilt which survives to this day amongst Germans because of the atrocities of the Third Reich. Schlink argues that contemporary Germany is still characterized in some sense by a second guilt, the guilt felt by the younger generation for the sins of the fathers. Although he believes Germany is approaching a guilt-free period, in his words, we are not there yet. Schlink, who was born a year before the end of the Second World War, said it was in the 1960s when the German public first began to reflect openly and intensively on Nazi crimes and their own moral culpability in those crimes. Do white South Africans feel guilt today? Given what seems to be happening in schools, restaurants, on social media, doesn't seem like it. How did the Germans come to recognize their guilt? One of the ways was an intensive denazification program that was conducted by the British and American troops after the war. These involved posters of concentration camps with slogans such as, "These atrocities, your fault." South Africa opted for the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The former Minister of Justice, Dalla Omar, stated that a commission is a necessary exercise to enable South Africans to come to terms with their past on a morally accepted basis and to advance the cause of reconciliation. Many people have argued that the TRC did not achieve its aims, that the reconciliation that it appeared to have brought about was very superficial. This does seem to be the case. Cracks in the Rainbow Nation are appearing and widen with every use of the K word, with every comparison to monkeys, with every comment about these people. It's as if we've lost the self-control we all adopted in the first few years post-apartheid, as if we were all on our best behavior in front of the adults, and then the adults left the room and all hell broke loose. With the death of Madiba came the death of self-regulation and impulse control. Why is this? Well, evidence suggests that a lack of belongingness inhibits people's ability to self-regulate. This would suggest that as white South Africans feel less and less like they belong here, so their impulse control and self-regulation decreases. But I wonder if it doesn't work the other way, that maybe a lack of an ability to self-regulate decreases an ability to belong. If we, as whites, want to belong, to be considered by black South Africans as belonging, then we need to learn that it's not just sticks and stones that break bones. Words do very real harm too. In 1999, a report by the South African Human Rights Commission found that there was a policy vacuum in the area of racial awareness and sensitivity in South African schools, and recommended that anti-racist training for district officials, governing bodies, teachers, and learners be prioritized. The authors of the report warned that if racism could not be satisfactorily addressed in South African schools, our country will pay the price. And paying the price, we are. It's not just racism, of course. It's sexism, homophobia, xenophobia. These seem to characterize and indeed monopolize South African discourses. And the fact that it's happening in schools among the born-frees is the most worrying. So what is to be done? When you are invited to give a TEDx talk, you are warned against selling from the stage. But I'm about to break that rule. I'm going to sell you a solution. And that solution is philosophy. In November 2015, Senator Marco Rubio stated that America needed more welders and less philosophers. Clearly, they also need more English teachers, because it should have been fewer philosophers, not less philosophers. I have nothing against welders, but I think Rubio is very, very wrong. The more philosophers we have, the better. This is because philosophy attempts, at one level at least, to cultivate phronesis, or practical wisdom, which helps us to act virtuously and to encourage excellence of character in others. Ted Wrigley writes that people have an unfortunate tendency to act without reflection or consistency, letting instinct and gut-level reactions guide their behavior. Philosophy tries as a rule to elevate reason so that it rules how we act rather than serves how we feel. A world without philosophers is a world of self-righteous people with no impulse control, or people with rigidly dogmatic and unself-reflective worldviews. I'm often asked, what is it exactly that philosophers do? John Campbell, the Berkeley philosopher, explains it as thinking in slow motion. It breaks down, describes, and assesses moves we ordinarily make at great speed. It then becomes evident that alternatives are possible. The tools of philosophy, critical, creative, and logical thinking, can help us make sense of our day-to-day experiences and respond to these experiences in ways that respect the humanity of others and of ourselves. Philosophy helps us to examine our tendency as humans to make judgments based on feelings rather than rationality. It helps us to differentiate between basic beliefs, or what we call intuitions, and justified true beliefs, what philosophers call knowledge. The concept of a justified true belief states that in order to know that a given proposition is true, one must not only believe the relevant true proposition, but also have justification for believing it to be. Justification comes in the form of reasons, and not just any reason will do. In response to Rubio's comments about philosophers, writer Gracie Olmsted argues that the best sort of education is one that does not make you a better worker, but rather the sort that makes you a better human being. I think we need to introduce philosophy in some form into the school curriculum. According to 2016 figures, 46% of the population in South Africa is under 24 years old. While we cannot change the past, we can mold the future. But we need to act fast by getting young people to think more slowly before they speak, before they tweet, before they post. Alfred Adler said, "A person's behavior springs from his ideas." If we understand that philosophy is really about the study of ideas and their power in our lives, we will begin to understand that we really can change people's behavior by challenging their ideas. So let me challenge the idea that I am an immigrant. The definition of an immigrant is a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country. I didn't come to live here. I was born here, as were my parents and my grandparents. Indeed, my family has been in South Africa since the 1880s, when my great-grandfather left Eastern Europe to escape the pogroms and anti-Semitism that characterized the Russian Empire. South Africa became famous as a haven for its 120,000 Jews, many of whom, including my family, would have perished in the Holocaust had they stayed in Europe. And South Africa isn't a foreign country. It's my home, my only home. I have never considered packing for Perth or being part of the white flight. While I deny being an immigrant, maybe the issue is that I am not native to South Africa. Native is an interesting word. While its root is in the Latin nate, meaning born, it can also refer to one's origin, not necessarily the place where one is born, but the place where one comes from originally. Most people consider the Khoi and San people as being the first inhabitants of what is now South Africa. Evidence points to the arrival of the Khoi San people around 2,000 years ago. This was followed in the early centuries AD of the Bantu-speaking communities who would have reached southern Africa from the Congo Basin. Some of the migrant groups, ancestral to today's Nguni peoples, prefer to live near the eastern coast of what is present-day South Africa, while others, known as the Sotho-Tswana people, settled in the Highveld, with the Venda, Lemba, and Shangaan-Tsonga peoples in the northeastern area. So no one is native to South Africa. We are all from somewhere else, originally. Why does it matter whether it was 2,000 years ago or 200? I want to go back now to Weiss's claim that this country and continent is not ours. Perhaps what she means is that we have to earn our right to regain our membership because we have abused our position as members. If this is the case, then perhaps we need to consider the idea of belonging as taking ownership of, not the land, not the people, but the past. I stand here knowing that so much of my good fortune came because of others' misfortune. While I did not actively support apartheid, I am a beneficiary of it. It is this recognition that makes me who I am and makes me believe I belong here. I belong here because I am committed to the rebuilding of this place, my home. Thank you.